What do you do when the man you need to kill will never let you get close enough to pull the trigger? In 2008, Imad Mughniyeh was the most protected terrorist in the Middle East. Hezbollah's military commander had orchestrated attacks that killed hundreds. He moved through Damascus under Syrian protection, changing vehicles daily, trusting no patterns, meeting contacts in locations swept for surveillance devices hours before his arrival. Mossad had tried following him. Teams were identified and expelled within days. They tried electronic tracking. His security detail swept for devices obsessively. Direct action required proximity, and proximity required something Mossad had never successfully achieved, a reason to be close that wouldn't trigger suspicion. The problem wasn't intelligence. Syrian contacts confirmed where Mugnia lived, where he conducted meetings. The problem was access. How do you get an Israeli operative into the inner circle of a man who assumes everyone around him might be working for Israeli intelligence? In late 2007, Mossad proposed something they had never attempted in Syria. Not surveillance from a distance, not a brief insertion followed by extraction. A deep cover operation requiring an agent to live as a Syrian, embedded so thoroughly in Damascus society that Hezbollah's own operatives would vouch for him. The operative chosen was Daniel. Not his real name, not even the name he would use in Damascus. He had spent 4 years in deep cover in Lebanon during the 1990s, his Arabic fluent in the Levantine dialect. His background story tested under hostile interrogation and survived. But this mission required more than language skills. It required Daniel to become someone else so completely that exposure would demand Hezbollah's own people to doubt their own judgment about a man they had known for months. What Mossad didn't tell Daniel was that his cover was designed to collapse. Not immediately, not until after it had served its purpose, but collapse it would, and when it did, there would be no second chance at extraction. Daniel's legend didn't start with the forged documents. It started with a real Syrian tailor named Khalil Mansour, who had left Damascus in 2004, emigrating to Germany after years of struggling to keep his family workshop profitable. Mansour had left behind property deeds, unresolved inheritance claims, and relatives who barely remembered him. Through German intelligence intermediaries, Mossad approached Mansour with an offer: sell his Syrian identity for resettlement assistance in Canada. Mansour's family would receive new documentation, financial support, and a future outside the Middle East. In exchange, Mossad would assume control of his past. Mansour agreed. By November 2007, he and his family had disappeared into new lives in Toronto. Daniel didn't impersonate Mansour. The resemblance wasn't close enough. Instead, Mossad constructed something more sophisticated. Daniel became a cousin Mansour's family barely remembered, the one who had worked in Aleppo for years, returning to Damascus to claim the family's old workshop space and reopen it as a tailoring business. The first flaw appeared during planning sessions in Tel Aviv. Mansour's relatives still lived in Damascus. His elderly aunt visited the old neighborhood regularly. If she walked into the shop and didn't recognize Daniel, the entire operation would collapse before it began. Mossad's solution was counterintuitive. Instead of avoiding the aunt, they used her. Through a Lebanese intermediary with no direct connection to Israeli intelligence, Mossad arranged a meeting. Daniel sat across from Mansour's aunt in a Damascus cafe in January 2008, recounting fabricated memories of family gatherings, using details Mossad had extracted from Mansour during debriefing sessions in Germany. The aunt believed him. She didn't just accept his story, she embraced it, grateful that family had returned to reclaim what Mansour had abandoned. Within a week, she had introduced Daniel to the extended family, cousins he had never met, neighbors who remembered the workshop from decades earlier. A social network that validated his presence in ways forged documents never could. But this created a problem Daniel hadn't anticipated. He now had obligations, invitations to family events, requests for favors. A cousin who wanted him to hire her unemployed son as an assistant. Each interaction deepened the cover. Each interaction also increased the surface area for mistakes. The tailoring shop opened in February 2008 on a street 3 blocks from a building Mossad had identified through intercepted communications as a Hezbollah logistics safe house. The location wasn't coincidental. Mossad needed confirmation of who entered that building and when, but traditional surveillance had failed repeatedly. Daniel's assignment wasn't to watch the safe house directly. It was to become so thoroughly embedded in the neighborhood's daily rhythm that Hezbollah operatives would choose to trust him. He hired the cousin's son, a young man named Tariq, who needed work, and asked no questions about why a tailor returning from Aleppo would choose this particular street for his shop. What Tariq didn't know was that every appointment Daniel scheduled was recorded by a camera that hidden inside a wall-mounted clock. Every customer who mentioned travel plans, meeting times, or contact names inadvertently fed intelligence to a Mossad analysis cell monitoring transmissions from Tel Aviv. The business was real. Daniel actually sewed. He fitted garments, argued with customers over pricing, built a reputation for quality work at fair rates. By April, 3 men who worked in the building Mossad was monitoring had become regular customers. They came for alterations, custom suits, casual repairs. None of them mentioned Hezbollah. None of them needed to. Their faces, their schedules, their conversations about upcoming trips provided the mapping Mossad needed. Then one of them started asking questions. Daniel wasn't prepared to answer. His name was Hassan, a mid-level logistics coordinator who needed suits for a series of meetings in Beirut. During the second fitting, Hassan mentioned Aleppo. Not casually, specifically. Street names, shop locations, details someone who had actually worked there for years should know intimately. Daniel answered using information Mossad had provided during training, but Hassan's questions weren't random. He was testing the legend, probing for inconsistencies that would reveal whether Daniel's story could withstand scrutiny. After Hassan left, Daniel transmitted an emergency signal. Someone was vetting him. If Hassan ran a background check through Hezbollah's intelligence network, if he contacted associates in Aleppo who had never heard of Daniel's assumed identity, the operation could unravel. Mossad's response arrived 12 hours later. Do nothing. Changing behavior would confirm suspicion. Maintaining consistency might exhaust Hassan's paranoia. Daniel stayed. He kept tailoring suits. He kept attending family gatherings. And slowly, Hassan's questions stopped. But what Daniel didn't know was that Hassan hadn't abandoned his investigation. He had simply moved it into channels Daniel couldn't monitor. Who was Hassan really reporting to? And what would happen when those reports reached someone with the authority to act on suspicion? In June 2008, Daniel received an invitation that should have been simple to handle. Mansour's family was hosting a wedding for a distant cousin. The entire extended family would attend, including relatives traveling from Aleppo and Homs. Refusing would be noticed. Questions would be asked. The timing was catastrophic. Mossad had identified a pattern in Mughniyeh's movements through signals intelligence and surveillance of the Hezbollah safe house. He met with operatives at a specific apartment in the Kafr Sousa district every third Thursday evening. The next confirmed meeting was scheduled for June 19th, the same day as the wedding. Daniel sent an urgent message to his handler in Tel Aviv. The choice was binary. Attend the wedding and maintain the cover, or skip it and be available for surveillance positioning if Mugnia appeared at the expected location. His handler's response was unambiguous. Attend the wedding. The cover was more valuable than a single surveillance opportunity. If Daniel's absence raised questions among the family, those questions would circulate through the neighborhood. Eventually, they would reach someone connected to Hezbollah. Daniel went to the wedding. He danced with relatives he had never actually met. He posed for photographs with Mansour's aunt, his arm around her shoulders, smiling for a camera that would preserve evidence of a relationship built entirely on fabricated memories. While he celebrated, Mossad's surveillance team confirmed Mughniyeh's arrival at the Kafr Sousa apartment. They documented his security convoy, the timing of his arrival, the duration of his stay. Intelligence. Daniel should have been positioned to verify, but 2 days after the wedding, something unexpected happened. Hassan returned to the shop with a new customer, a senior Hezbollah operative named Ghassan who needed 3 custom suits for an upcoming trip to Tehran. Ghassan was different from Hassan. He didn't ask probing questions about Aleppo. He didn't test Daniel's background story. He was relaxed, almost careless, mentioning the Tehran trip as if tailors were too insignificant to worry about operational security. Daniel took measurements. He recorded fabric preferences, he scheduled fittings, and he transmitted every detail to Tel Aviv, including the travel dates that would allow Mossad to track Ghassan's movements. What Daniel didn't realize until later was that Ghassan had been at the wedding, not as a guest, but as security. One of Hassan's contacts positioned outside the venue, watching who arrived and how they interacted with the family. Ghassan had seen Daniel with Mansour's aunt. He had watched Daniel navigate family dynamics, respond to inside jokes, demonstrate the kind of familiarity that couldn't be faked during a brief interaction. The wedding hadn't just maintained the cover. It had made Daniel invisible. He was too embedded, too Syrian, too verifiable to suspect. But it had also done something else. It had trapped him inside a life he couldn't easily abandon. In July, Mossad confirmed the pattern they had been tracking. Mugnia attended meetings at the Kafir Sousa apartment every third Thursday. Departure approximately 90 minutes later. Security convoy of 3 vehicles with armed personnel. Assassination required marking him in a way that allowed precision targeting without collateral damage. Car bombs were too indiscriminate in Damascus traffic. Sniper positions required angles that didn't exist given the building's location. Poison demanded access Mossad couldn't create. The technical solution was a magnetic tracking device small enough to attach to a vehicle's undercarriage in under 3 seconds. Once placed, it would transmit real-time location data, allowing Mossad to trigger a shaped explosive charge at a moment when Mughniyeh was isolated from civilians. The operational problem was placement. Someone needed proximity to Mughniyeh's vehicle without triggering the security detail's immediate response. Mossad proposed using Daniel. His shop was on a route between the Kafir Sousa apartment and Mughniyeh's suspected residence. On the right Thursday, with the right setup, Daniel could create a minor traffic incident as the convoy passed, use the momentary confusion to approach one of the vehicles, and place the device. Daniel refused. The proposal required him to expose himself in a way that made survival nearly impossible. Even if he successfully attached the device, Hezbollah would review security footage, interview witnesses, trace his movements back to the shop within hours. His handler's response was blunt. There was no alternative. Every other approach required infrastructure Mossad couldn't build without alerting Syrian intelligence. Daniel sent a message demanding extraction immediately after the placement attempt. No delay, no preserving the cover for future operations. Tel Aviv agreed. On August 12, 2008, Daniel closed the shop early, citing a family emergency to Tariq. He positioned himself near an intersection on the projected route, carrying a small bag that contained the tracking device and a story about car trouble if security personnel questioned him. At 10:47 p.m., the convoy appeared. 3 vehicles, the center one armored, moving at moderate speed through light traffic. Daniel stepped into the street, forcing the lead vehicle to brake hard. Security personnel exited immediately, weapons visible but not raised, shouting at him to move. Daniel played the confused civilian, apologizing in rapid Arabic, backing away with hands visible and empty. But the security response was faster than Mossad's planners had anticipated. The convoy didn't stop. The center vehicle continued moving while the security detail repositioned around it. The window for placement never existed. Daniel returned to the shop. He transmitted the failure report to Tel Aviv and waited for extraction orders. They didn't come. Instead, his handler sent new instructions. Stay in place. The August attempt had provided valuable intelligence about the convoy's security protocols. Mossad had identified weaknesses in their response pattern. Another opportunity was being planned. Daniel sent 3 messages demanding immediate extraction. Each received the same response. His cover was too valuable to abandon. Mossad needed him positioned in Damascus for secondary confirmation of the future meetings. Then Daniel understood what had actually happened. The August placement attempt had never been intended to succeed. Mossad hadn't sent Daniel into the street believing he could attach a tracking device to a moving convoy protected by trained security personnel. They had sent him to measure the response. How quickly did the detail react? How thoroughly did they sweep the area afterward? What patterns could be identified in their positioning? Daniel had been the probe, the bait used to extract information about Hezbollah's security procedures. And now Mossad wanted him to remain in place because his cover, his relationships, his access to Hezbollah operatives who visited the shop were more valuable than his safety. In September, Hassan returned with a request that confirmed Daniel's worst assessment of his situation. Hassan wanted Daniel to tailor suits for a private client. The client would visit after hours. No other customers present. No assistant. The client was Imad Mughniyeh. Daniel transmitted the information with an urgent assessment. This was either the opportunity Mossad needed or a trap. If Hezbollah suspected him, bringing Mugnia to the shop was the perfect setup for capture. Mossad's analysis division ran probability assessments. They concluded the meeting was genuine. Mughniyeh needed tailoring services, and Hassan had vouched for Daniel's work based on the wedding, the family connections, the months of verified presence in the neighborhood. Daniel was ordered to proceed, but he was also told something else. If the meeting was a trap, if Hezbollah arrested him, Mossad would deny any connection. The cover was too deep to acknowledge. Daniel would be alone. What choice did Hassan actually make when he invited Mugnia to the shop? And if Hezbollah suspected Daniel, why would they bring their most valuable commander directly to him instead of simply arresting the tailor who asked too few questions? On October 3, 2008, at 8:45 p.m., Daniel locked the front door of the shop and turned the sign to closed. Tariq had left an hour earlier, unaware that his employer was preparing for a meeting that could end in either intelligence breakthrough or capture. Daniel had swept the shop twice for listening devices using equipment Mossad had provided through a dead drop. He found nothing, but the absence of surveillance equipment didn't mean he wasn't being watched. Hezbollah could be monitoring from the building across the street, from a parked car, from any of a dozen positions he couldn't verify. At 8:58 p.m., a black sedan pulled up outside. No security convoy, no visible protection. Just a single vehicle with a driver who remained behind the wheel. Imad Mughniyeh entered alone. He was shorter than Daniel had expected from the intelligence photographs, his hair graying at the temples, his posture relaxed in a way that suggested either complete confidence or complete indifference to potential threats. He wore civilian clothes, expensive but not ostentatious, and he carried himself like a man accustomed to rooms falling silent when he entered. Daniel greeted him in Arabic, gesturing toward the fitting area in the back room. Standard procedure, nothing unusual. Mughniyeh followed without hesitation. The back room was small, barely large enough for the fitting platform and the full-length mirror. Daniel had positioned the hidden camera to capture the space from an elevated angle, but he had no way to verify it was functioning without checking the transmission logs later. He began with the standard questions. What style did Mughniyeh prefer? What occasions would he wear the suits for? Any specific fabric requirements? Mughniyeh answered, each question directly, his tone professional. He wanted 3 suits, classic cuts, nothing fashionable. Dark colors. He had meetings scheduled over the next several months that required appropriate attire. Daniel took out his measuring tape and began the process he had performed dozens of times since opening the shop. Shoulders first, chest, waist, each measurement recorded in a notebook that would be photographed and transmitted to Tel Aviv within hours. Then Mughniyeh asked about Daniel's family. The question was delivered casually, almost as an afterthought while Daniel was measuring the inseam. Where had his family come from originally? How long had they been in Damascus? Daniel recited the fabricated history. His family had roots in Damascus going back generations, though he himself had spent years in Aleppo working for another tailor before returning to reclaim the family workshop. Mughniyeh nodded, seemingly satisfied. Then he mentioned almost offhandedly that he had cousins in Aleppo. Perhaps they knew some of the same families. The city was large, of course, but the tailoring community was relatively small. Daniel felt his pulse spike, but kept his hand steady on the measuring tape. This was a test. Not an aggressive interrogation, but a probe designed to see if his story would hold under casual scrutiny. He deflected by mentioning that he had worked primarily in the Christian quarter of Aleppo, keeping to himself, focused on building his skills rather than networking extensively. It was plausible. It created distance from verification. Mughniyeh accepted the answer without pressing further. But then he did something Daniel hadn't anticipated. He asked about the wedding. Had Daniel enjoyed the family gathering in June? Mughniyeh had heard from Hassan that Daniel had reconnected with relatives after years away. It must have been meaningful to see family again. The question froze Daniel's thought process for a fraction of a second too long. How did Mughniyeh know about the wedding? Hassan had been there. But why would Hassan mention a family event to Hezbollah's military commander, unless there was a reason to discuss it? Daniel recovered, saying yes. The wedding had been wonderful, a reminder of why he had returned to Damascus instead of staying in Aleppo. Mughniyeh smiled. He said something that made Daniel's stomach drop. He said he had seen the photographs, not heard about them. seen them. Someone had shown Mugnia pictures from the wedding. Someone had briefed him on Daniel's family connections, his integration into the neighborhood, his verified presence at family events. This wasn't a casual fitting appointment. This was an evaluation. Daniel continued taking measurements, keeping his expression neutral, his hands moving through the familiar motions. He recorded the sleeve length, the jacket length, the trouser measurements. Mugnia asked about turnaround time. When could the suits be ready? Daniel said 3 weeks for the first suit, 4 for the others if Mugnia wanted the fitting staggered to ensure perfect alterations. Mugnia agreed to the timeline. He would return in 3 weeks for the first fitting. Then he said something that revealed the actual purpose of the visit. He asked if Daniel had ever considered expanding the business. Opening a second location, perhaps. Hassan had mentioned that Daniel's work was excellent, that he had built a loyal customer base quickly. There might be opportunities for growth, particularly if Daniel was interested in serving clients who valued discretion. The offer was wrapped in business language, but the subtext was clear. Hezbollah was proposing to bring Daniel deeper into their network, not as an operative, but as infrastructure. A tailor who could be trusted with sensitive work for sensitive clients. Daniel's response had to walk an impossible line. Accepting too quickly would seem suspicious. Refusing would raise questions about why a businessman would turn down lucrative contracts. He said he would consider it, but he preferred to keep the business small for now. Quality over expansion. He had returned to Damascus to rebuild the family legacy, not to become wealthy. Mugnia seemed to accept this. He stood, shook Daniel's hand, and left without ceremony. The entire meeting had lasted 42 minutes. After Mugnia's sedan pulled away, Daniel locked the door and sat in the back room for 15 minutes, processing what had just happened. Then he transmitted an emergency message to Tel Aviv. The meeting had occurred, but it wasn't what Mossad had anticipated. Mughniyeh hadn't come for tailoring. He had come to evaluate whether Daniel could be useful beyond basic intelligence collection. Hezbollah was recruiting him. Daniel's message was explicit. He needed extraction immediately. The proximity was too dangerous. If Mughniyeh decided to vet him more thoroughly, if he tasked someone to verify the Aleppo background story with actual contacts in that city, the cover would collapse. Mossad's response came 14 hours later. Stay in place. Do not alter your pattern. Accept the next fitting appointment when Mughniyeh calls to schedule it. Daniel sent a second message. Staying in place meant accepting deeper integration into Hezbollah's network. It meant lying to Mughniyeh's face during multiple future interactions. It meant increasing the risk exponentially every day he remained in Damascus. The response from Tel Aviv was shorter this time. Your cover is the most valuable asset we have in Damascus. We need you positioned for the February operation. Daniel realized they had never intended to extract him before the assassination. His survival wasn't the priority. The intelligence he could provide, the access he had built, the trust he had earned from Hassan and now potentially from Mughniyeh himself, all of it was too valuable to abandon. He wasn't an operative anymore. He was infrastructure that Mossad would use until it broke. On October 24th, Mughniyeh returned for his first fitting. He tried on the jacket, approved the alterations, mentioned he would need the remaining suits by January for meetings scheduled in Tehran and Beirut. Before leaving, he asked Daniel if he had reconsidered the expansion proposal. Daniel said he was still thinking about it. He wanted to ensure he could maintain quality standards before taking on additional clients. Mughniyeh nodded. He said Hassan had vouched strongly for Daniel's discretion. That meant something. Trustworthy people were rare. Then he left. Daniel transmitted the conversation to Tel Aviv along with a single question he already knew the answer to. When were they actually planning to extract him? The response never directly answered. Instead, they confirmed the February timeline and instructed him to maintain all current relationships without deviation. What Daniel didn't know, what Mossad hadn't told him, was that Hassan had been reporting on him since August. Not to expose him as Israeli intelligence, but to evaluate him for exactly what Mughniyeh had proposed. Recruitment into Hezbollah's trusted service network. Hassan's investigation hadn't been about suspicion. It had been about vetting. And Daniel had passed. On February 12, 2009, at approximately 10:45 p.m., a car bomb detonated in the Kafr Sousa district of Damascus. The explosion killed Imad Mughniyeh instantly, destroying his vehicle and creating a crater in the street that would remain visible for months. Within 2 hours, Hezbollah declared a state of emergency. Security teams swept Damascus for Israeli operatives. Checkpoints appeared on every major road. Syrian intelligence began detaining anyone with suspected foreign connections. Daniel was in the shop when the explosion occurred, 3 kilometers away. He heard the blast through the closed windows. He knew immediately what it meant. He sent an extraction request to Tel Aviv. The response told him to wait 72 hours. Moving immediately after the assassination would confirm Israeli involvement in a way that could trigger wider retaliation. He needed to maintain normal operations, continue serving customers, pretend ignorance. For 3 days, Daniel tailored suits while Damascus security forces searched for whoever had killed Hezbollah's military commander. On February 15th, Hassan entered the shop. He didn't want tailoring. He closed the door behind him, locked it, and gestured for Daniel to sit in the back room. Hassan asked about Mughniyeh's visits. Simple questions. When had he come? What had they discussed? Had anyone asked questions about him afterward? Daniel answered truthfully. There was no safer option. Lying about verifiable facts would create suspicion where none might exist. Hassan listened without expression. Then he said something that revealed how thoroughly Daniel had misunderstood his own situation. Hassan said Daniel had been under surveillance since August. Not Hezbollah surveillance looking for Israeli intelligence. Syrian intelligence surveillance looking for Hezbollah security leaks. The Syrian regime had been tracking everyone who met with Mughniyeh, trying to map his network, identify his contacts, understand the scope of Hezbollah's operations inside Damascus. Daniel's shop had appeared in that surveillance because Mughniyeh had visited twice. Syrian intelligence had interviewed Hassan 3 days earlier. They wanted to know who had vouched for the tailor, who had introduced Mughniyeh to him. Whether Hassan had noticed anything unusual about Daniel's behavior. Hassan had vouched for Daniel completely. He had told Syrian intelligence that Daniel was family connected, neighborhood embedded, verified through multiple sources. Syrian intelligence had accepted this and moved on to other suspects, but Hassan's expression made clear that vouching for Daniel had put Hassan's own position at risk. If Daniel turned out to be connected to the assassination, Hassan would be implicated as either incompetent or complicit. Hassan asked one final question. Had Daniel ever worked for anyone besides himself? Daniel said no, just the family business, just tailoring. Hassan stared at him for a long moment. Then he stood and left without another word. 2 days later, Mossad extracted Daniel through a route that took him across the Lebanese border in a furniture truck. By February 18th, he was in a debriefing facility in Tel Aviv, answering questions about every interaction with Mughniyeh, every conversation with Hassan, every detail of the operation. The debriefing lasted 6 weeks. Analysts wanted to understand not just what Daniel had observed, but what Hezbollah had learned about Mossad's operational methods by allowing the operation to proceed. Because the assumption that Hezbollah had been completely deceived was wrong. In August 2010, Hezbollah released a propaganda video documenting Israeli espionage operations in Lebanon and Syria. The video included footage of Daniel's shop, preserved exactly as he had left it. The camera equipment hidden in the wall clock. The measurement records that included notations only an intelligence operative would make. The family photographs staged to create the illusion of generational presence. The video also included something that shocked Mossad's counterintelligence division. Hassan had placed a listening device in the shop's back room in September 2008, 3 weeks before Mughniyeh's first visit. Hezbollah had recordings, not of every conversation, but enough. Daniel's emergency transmissions to Tel Aviv, his requests for extraction, his operational check-ins using coded language that Hezbollah's technical division had partially decrypted. They had known Daniel was Israeli intelligence. They had allowed him to continue operating because his presence revealed information they needed. How Mossad communicated with deep cover, operatives, what equipment they used, how quickly they could respond to emergency situations, what risk tolerance they maintained for asset protection. Mossad had successfully assassinated Mughniyeh, but in doing so, they had exposed operational methodologies that Hezbollah used to identify and compromise 3 other Israeli intelligence networks operating in Lebanon between 2009 and 2011. The tailoring shop operation had worked. It had also taught Hezbollah exactly what to look for in future Israeli infiltration attempts. Daniel never returned to field operations. Mossad's medical evaluation determined he was psychologically unsuitable for deep cover work after spending 10 months believing he might be abandoned in Damascus if the operation failed. He was reassigned to training, teaching new operatives how to construct and maintain legends under hostile conditions. He taught them how to build relationships that felt real, how to lie to people who trusted you, how to live inside a false identity without forgetting who you actually were. What he didn't teach them, what wasn't in any training manual, was how to process the fact that the people you deceived might have been deceiving you the entire time. In 2015, Mossad declassified portions of the operation for internal training purposes. One detail stood out in the operational review. The original extraction plan had scheduled Daniel's departure for August 2009, 6 months after Mughniyeh's assassination. His emergency extraction request in February had forced Mossad to abandon that timeline and lose potential intelligence his continued presence could have provided. The review noted this as an operational cost. It didn't mention that leaving Daniel in place for an additional 6 months after Hezbollah had already identified him as Israeli intelligence would have likely resulted in his arrest and execution. Mansour's aunt, the woman who had vouched for Daniel and introduced him to the extended family, was interviewed by Hezbollah in 2009. She maintained until her death in 2014 that the man who had reopened the family shop had been her nephew's cousin. She never accepted that the relationship had been fabricated. The shop in Damascus remained closed until 2018, when it was demolished during neighborhood redevelopment. By then, Hassan had left Hezbollah, relocated to Beirut, and refused all interview requests about the operation. Daniel lives in Tel Aviv. He doesn't tailor suits anymore. Former colleagues say he measures distances differently now, his spatial awareness permanently altered by months of calculating escape routes and surveillance angles. The deception that killed Imad Mughniyeh succeeded in its primary objective. But success came with a cost neither side had fully anticipated. Mossad lost operational methodology, Hezbollah lost its military commander, and Daniel lost the ability to ever fully trust that the people around him were actually who they claimed to be. Sometimes, the most dangerous deception isn't the one that fails, it's the one that succeeds while teaching your enemy exactly how you think.